So good morning. Thanks to everyone for joining us. I have the pleasure of chairing this session today. Very excited about it, on dump closure with Sonia. So big thank you to Sonia for presenting and to everyone for coming. And so, yeah, Pilar will be muting you, but if you have any questions, at the end, we're going to have a session for questions and discussion. And we really encourage as much discussion as possible, but we're not sure if the hand raising function is working. So if that's not possible for you, then just unmute yourself and say your question at the end. So before I pass it over to Sonia, I just wanted to give a quick intro about why this topic is so important for our focal cities work and our local work more generally. So dump closure, as we know, is one of these trends in the modernization of the waste sector that threatens to displace waste pickers, along with incineration, containerization, and other technology. And in our local work at the focal city level over the past few years, dump closure has become a critical issue, especially in West Africa, in Dakar and Accra. And in Dakar, we found out last year, after months of rumors, we found out for certain that the Senegalese government had signed a contract with the World Bank to restructure Boubous, where the Waste Picker Association Bokdiom works. And recently, we found out that the project is still not well defined, but we made a contact with the World Bank who said that they're going to be consulting with the waste pickers. But it's been a long time of, not a lot of clarity on what's going to happen and not a lot of openness on the part of the World Bank. In Accra, the Pong dump, where we work with the Waste Pickers Association, and at past a fever pitch, it's sort of at a breaking point where trucks are now having to dump. That closure is imminent. We're starting to work with the waste pickers on that basis. And in supporting waste pickers in both places to negotiate in the event of dump closure, we've had to build our internal capacity really quickly, which is not easy because it's such a nuanced and complex issue. But Sonia has been absolutely instrumental in that process, in quickly coming up with a position paper on dump closure, in holding workshops through the Reducing Waste in Coastal Cities project, most recently in Dakar, with waste picker representatives and focal cities teams there, and by providing direct support to the teams as well. And the Brasilia example, as far as I know, is the only one that we have globally as a positive example of waste picker integration after dump closure. And the example itself has already been very powerful in our work. In a recent workshop in Accra on solid waste management, the president of the Pong Landfill Waste Picker Association got up and sort of spontaneously started talking about what he had learned from Sonia's presentation of the Brazilian example. And to our knowledge, that was the first time that an association leader had really engaged the association about dump closure, which had previously been sort of a taboo topic because the consequences would be so dire. It isn't something that they had really talked about before, but they're starting to talk about it. And this example has proved really helpful in that process of showing what's possible. And yeah, so just I'll pass it over to Sonia now, but just wanted to underscore how important this has been for us in our local work and will continue to be as these processes develop. So now I'll just pass it over to Sonia, and Sonia has about 30 minutes to present, but if you need more Sonia, that's also fine. And afterwards, we'll open it up to questions and discussion. So over to you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Anna, for this introduction. Hi, everyone, wherever you are, good morning or good afternoon. Before I go into details on the process of the dump closure and the main features in terms of livelihoods, I want to give you some background context. First of all, about the work that WIEGO is doing in this process in Brasilia, the capital city of Brazil. Is a federal district, so it has a status of, governorate. We were invited in 2015 by the governor of Brasilia to join an international monitoring committee to oversee the environmental and social aspects of the closure of the then open dump called Estrutural. And in this committee, we have the National Association of Sanitation, sanitation agencies. We have the National Association of Sanitary Engineers. We have the International Solid Waste Association, and we have WIEGO. So each association follows different aspects. All the others follow environmental aspects of closing the dump, because there are some kind of work that needs to be done in terms of environmental recovery. And of course, WIEGO was entrusted with the responsibility of overseeing the process of closing the dump and moving the dump pickers to cooperatives, sorting centers that were built and or rented by the government. So this presentation is a kind of summary of the process and the livelihood measures and learnings. I won't get into much detail of WIEGO's work in it, because what I want today is to give you an idea of how comprehensive the measures addressing livelihoods were and how these measures came into being, okay? So in doing this presentation about the process and the measures, first of all, I want you to have an idea of the context in terms of the solid waste issue, what the size of the dump and some characteristics, some idea of the judicial interventions that obliged the government to close the dump, and some context in terms of what existed in terms of organizing, how organized the waste pickers were, and the participatory platforms that were in place before this process began. And then I will move into the process and the measures implemented, and I will conclude by having some reflections in terms of gaps and some of the next steps. Okay, next slide, please. I apologize because I have a power cut here, so I'm hotspotting, and if there is any problem in the connection, apologies in advance. So, a little bit of background. So Brasilia is Brazil's capital city, is 58 years old, is a World Heritage Site, and we have about 3 million inhabitants there. We have the highest per capita in the country. It's where the government, the Senate House and the Parliament is. It's where we have, Brazil's president, and it's an expensive city with high levels also of social and economic inequality. Next, please. In terms of the dump is located near a national park. So it's also near the basin of a river called Paranoá. Is the river that supplies the water to Brasilia. So there were some concern over contamination of groundwater and many risks to human health for the population of Brasilia, and this was one of very big concern. Also, the dump is reported to be by ISVA, the International Solid Waste Association, as the second largest open dump in the world after Jakarta. It was, because the dump was closed, but this was the context. And it had been in operation since the 1960s, and it received household waste, commercial waste, construction waste, and bulky and waste from pruning. Next, please. We had many reports in terms of child labor, numerous accidents and deaths of waste pickers. In 1998, when we created the National Waste and Citizenship Forum, UNICEF, who helped us create this forum, did a research in many dumps in Brazil, and one of the places that were researched was a structural dump. So there were a lot of reports in terms of child labor and accidents with waste pickers. So against this background of environmental and social issues, the prosecutor office for the environment started to fine the government. In 2004, they ordered the city to close the dump and fine the city around over $3,000 per day because of the existence of the dump. So these fines began to accumulate. There were numerous talks that the government would close the dump, but nothing happened. And then the fines mounted up to around $6 million. And the prosecutor office issued more and more orders for immediate closure of the dump. Next, please. Another background context is in terms of what existed in terms of organizing in Brasilia. The first cooperative of waste pickers was created in Brazil in 1995. As some of you know, by 2001, we had the creation of the National Movement of Waste Pickers. We have representatives of the National Movement who are housed in Brasilia, who live there. We had the creation of what we call the second level cooperatives. We call them networks, redes in Portuguese. They are an association of different first level cooperatives, and they are created to represent these individual cooperatives in terms of capacity building and issues like joint commercialization and also political representation. So this gives you an idea of the kind of the level of organizing we had in Brasilia. And in terms of participatory platforms, we had in Brasilia the Intersecretariat Committee for Inclusion of Informal Recyclers, which had been created many years before the process of the dump closure began. And this committee is a committee that has representation of the cooperatives, waste picker cooperatives, civil society organizations, and representatives of different ministries. Okay, next, please. So, as I said, for many years, there was this drama to close or not to close the dump, the dispute between the government and the judiciary branch, and waste pickers were, they actually didn't believe this dump was going to be closed because each new government would announce its closure, but never committed to any process. And leaders of the informal recyclers, they were aware of these disputes, and due to the level of organizing, they were already discussing, you know, how we close dumps, because this is part of a main discussion we have in Brazil for many years since the creation of the National Waste and Citizenship Forum. And by 2015, when a new government takes power, the judiciary branch increased its pressure for the closure of the dump. So the new governor decided to take up the challenge of closing the open dump and asked to be the head of the sanitation department, an engineer that was the engineer that we work with here in Brasilia, in my city, Belo Horizonte, and that was later the main coordinator of the National Waste and Citizenship Forum. Next, please. So she takes the responsibility. She was then the president of the sanitation department, and she managed to get full support from the government for a process that could address the environmental and social aspects. It was then that she invited WIEGO to join this international committee, because she wanted a process in which we could have some independent organizations to oversee the whole process and follow up after the closure. So January 2015, the government of Brasilia conducts a preliminary diagnosis of the situation at the structural dump site. And this diagnosis, they identified 27 key problems, and they listed 17 government agencies that were relevant in terms of having a process in which responsibilities for different aspects of closing the dump were properly assigned. And the government drafts an emergency plan to address these 27 key problems. By 2015, the government of Brasilia creates an intersecretarial working group to elaborate a plan for the open dump. And this working group, which was a government working group, decided that the main steps towards closing the dump was, first, improve the dump's management towards from open dump to a controlled dump, so that the safety aspects could be improved for the waste pickers and for the formal workers that manage the dump. And decided to close the dump, and for that the government managed to get funds and built a proper sanitary landfill. Under Brazil's legislation, a sanitary landfill only receives this qualification if it follows environmental protective measures and also do not have any informal work being done at the landfill for the sake of their health and safety. And the government in this plan decides to migrate the dump pickers that worked at what we call it the for the lack of better word in English, but it's like the service front. It's where when the trucks come with the waste and the waste is discharged, this is a very unsafe area. So the government negotiated with the dump pickers that there would be a safer place within the open dump. This was before it was closed, in which they could do some reclaiming of waste. Okay. And the government agreed with the waste speakers that if they formed cooperatives, they could be later be hired, contracted as service providers when the dump closed. So the government started to support the waste speakers to form different cooperatives. Next, please. So by late 2015, the governor of Brasilia set up a special projects office and decided of 6 priority projects in his term of office. One of the priority projects was the closure of the dump. And this was an important thing because when he created this special projects office and decided to add the closure of the dump with social and environmental measures, this was key to help the process be as more inclusive as it is possible in a process like that. Next, please. So the government of Brasilia drafted an emergency plan prohibiting the entrance in the dump of the spoiled food to protect, the health of the waste speakers, assigned a special place for spoiled food dumping. Established gate closures and a swift control of the fires in the dump, and allocated dedicated places for the waste speakers to sort the materials. Next, please. All of that is what we call it transforming from an open dump to a controlled dump. It ended irregular activities in the dump. It started to incorporate the waste speakers in contracts, and implemented a recyclable waste collection in the city with the waste speakers, and started the whole process of modernization of the dump, and then constructing the sanitary landfill. Yes, next, please. So in this diagnosis, it was found out that there were more than 1,000 waste speakers, lack of fence and access control, presence of children, death by accident, waste speaker consumption of spoiled food, and many other issues that I've already explained. Next, please.
Totally fine. I can change to
Then the government started these meetings, the transition plan working group, in which they had all their staff, the government agencies that were relevant, and with representation of the waste speakers. Next, please. So here's just a photo of this transition plan meetings. Next, please. Next, please. Here are some photos of, yeah, you can go back. One slide. No, then forward. Next, please. Yes, please. And this is the follow. That's okay. Okay. So here are meetings with waste speakers and government officials. Next, please. So by 2016, some cooperatives were already created, and the government started contracting cooperatives of dump pickers. So by 2016, we had 4 cooperatives contracted for services of recyclable collection. Next, please. And the Waste and Citizenship Forum, because besides the Inter-Ministerial Social Inclusion Committee, there was a Waste and Citizenship Forum in place. So meetings carried on with representation of all sectors. Next, please. And still in the transition plan that the government built, the sanitary landfill was inaugurated. I was there at this event, and but what we agreed is I advised the government that they should, because the dump the sanitary landfill was already ready to receive waste. I advise the government to wait for another year to make the transition smoother with the waste pickers. And so the government agreed to carry on with activities in the open dump within a year before they shut down the dump completely. Next, please. So just a picture of meetings between waste pickers and different government and state monitoring agencies. Yes, next, please. By 2017, 9 cooperatives, 3 more were added, to the 6 that were contracted by 2016. So 9 cooperatives already had a contract with the government for recyclable collection. Next, please. So how did the government, how was the integration process of informal workers? There were dialogue and participatory planning within existing platforms, and also the creation of a specific working group to address the process of closing the dump. There was a diagnosis of the situation, and within this diagnosis, there was an epidemiological study. The University of Brasilia was hired by the government to conduct an epidemiological study to understand the health risks, to do a health screening, and to facilitate access to health assistance. And by then creating a baseline in terms of health risks of waste pickers. During this process, there was support in terms of capacity building for the creation of cooperatives of the dump pickers, in terms of supporting them with entrepreneurial skills, interpersonal relations, recycling, management of cooperatives, and many other technical and operational issues regarding collection and sorting. Next, please. There were contracts that were established, and one important thing in terms of the contract is that at first the government had proposed to contract the waste pickers with the amount of 95 reais, I forgot in dollars now, I forgot to do the math, and the waste pickers were complaining that they found that it was too little, and because of the work that we've been doing in terms of assisting this process, we were like, doing mediation, being like double agent. I advised Aline, who is the national waste picker leader based in Brasilia, to do some proper maps and, advise on the strategies. And I also advised the government that this amount was too little, and at the end of the process, the negotiation was good, and the waste pickers received up to 350 reais, which is around per ton, which is around $110. And the rental and or building of recycling warehouses started, and also the purchase of equipment for these sorting spaces. And there were some cash-in benefits that were established for the transition period from the open dump to the recycling warehouses. The waste pickers started to be paid this cash-in benefit, and also had access to exit strategies for those who didn't want to carry on working in recycling when the dump was to be closed. Next, please. So just pictures between dialogues between the waste pickers and governor. This was a story of conflict and negotiation. Sometimes the waste pickers would storm at the governor palace, and a lot of negotiations and bargaining, as it's usual in this process, even if you have a government who is committed to do a thorough process. And this is part of the success, you know, doing all this conflict and these negotiations. Next, please. The Way Speakers movement, national movement, was involved in the negotiations, and they would come, leaders from the national leaders based in other cities in Brazil would come to support the local national leaders and to negotiate with the government and the sanitation department team. Next, please. In the meantime, there were many processes and projects in place, like information centers for way speakers being implemented, the health screening, as I have mentioned, and many other projects and interventions. Next, please. A lot of effort in terms of doing communication with the way speakers. So the government would release posters summarizing the agreements made in the different meetings and negotiations with the way speakers, so that everybody was, you know, as much informed as it is possible in terms of the 6 key points that the way speakers had demanded and that the government had agreed. Next, please. And the capacity building, you know, during throughout these years was in place, different capacity building courses, some in partnership with different organizations in Brazil. Yes, next, please. And by 2018, as it was agreed with the way speakers, you know, this 1 year between the building of the sanitary landfill and the closure of the open dump, in January, it was the last day of the open dump. It was closed, and there was a wedding. Two way speakers who worked there who decided to get married on this very last day, and they hit the national news. Next, please. So when the dump was closed and all the way speakers were then denied access to this open dump, by then there were already 15 contracts in place for collection and sorting. There are different contracts. Some way speakers cooperatives are hired for collection, door-to-door collection of recyclables, and some are hired by sorting, and some have 2 kind of contracts, like one for collection and one for sorting. It all depends on the characteristics of each group that was formed. Next, please. So around, you know, 1,000 way speakers were involved in 28 different contracts with 22 cooperatives that were created to for the former dump pickers. Next, please. Some material recovery facilities were built. Not all of them have been built to date. Some way speakers are still working in improvised sorting places, but this is one that was built. Next, please. This is a project. It's not in place, but the livelihood plan drafted for the closure of the dump also included addressing housing, because there is this whole community that is this one thing is the dump, and the other thing is the people who live around the dump. A whole neighborhood was built over these years around the open dump, and so there is a project for condos to house the waste pickers. It's still in the plans and has not yet been built. Next, please. So what happened to the dump site? It was closed in January 2018, as I said. So there is a process of environmental recovery, which is ongoing, and the other organizations that are part of this independent monitoring committee that WIEGO belongs to, they are responsible to oversee what is being done. The University of Brasilia is now being engaged to do a monitoring of the health of the waste speakers in the cooperatives, and for that, WIEGO it's negotiating a memorandum of understanding with the University of Brasilia so that we can club together to do the monitoring of the impacts of closing the dump in the now cooperative members. And there are some studies being done in terms of energy recovery at the open dump, and the dump is being used now for debris. So construction waste is being taken to the dump is a way for recovery, environmental recovery. So next, please. The main challenges. The process was very comprehensive, but still there are a lot of challenges because the government, has to expand the recyclable collection for the entire federal district, and it has to increase the quality and quantity of the material collected in a society that is not used to do proper source segregation, and the lack of environmental education of citizens impacts the livelihoods of waste speakers because they don't get as good as recyclables as they should. There is this challenge to continue the technical assistance to the cooperatives in the context of a government change. This governor is no longer, the governor that closed the dump is no longer in office. And that's why we are negotiating this memorandum of understanding, the WIEGO and the University of Brasilia, and we are trying to get the health secretariat and other secretariats of the government as part of this memorandum of understanding to put some pressure, to work with us so that the measures implemented by the former government continues, okay? There is the increased income of waste speakers. When waste speakers leave the dump and go to work in waste speaker sorting places, there is this decrease of income because the quantity is lower, the quality is also not so good. So this is something that needs to be addressed. And there is the challenge of incorporating street waste speakers. Next, please. So let's do a step-by-step recap, okay? So we have the closure and livelihood protection included within the 6 priority projects by the governor of Brasilia. We had informal recyclers who were organized before the closure, and they were ready to engage in negotiations with the government. They were backed by their national movement of waste speakers. There was the creation of additional participatory governance platforms, the Intersecretariat Task Force with several government ministries, housing, public cleaning agents, and many other ministries. And they had these monthly meetings, all coordinated by the sanitation department, and there were representation of waste speakers in some of these meetings. And there was this process of transitioning from open dump to a controlled landfill, which allowed some improvements in the working conditions of the dump pickers and a bit of time for them to get used that the dump was going to be closed after so many decades of close and not to close. And so this was an important process. There was a diagnostic, environmental and social assessments, which included an epidemiological study. There was a creation of a dedicated team at the sanitation department for follow-up of the livelihoods protection aspects of the dump closure. This was very committed people. There were the creation of there was the involvement of existing participatory platforms, but also the creation of dedicated working groups and committees. And there was the creation of an external independent monitoring committee with ISVA and WIEGO and many other organizations in Brazil. Next, please. And also in this recap, what were the structures in terms of participatory governance? And this is important for WIEGO. So we had participatory committee, the transition committee within the government, but that had dialogues with the waste speakers. We had an existing, within the civil society, there was the Waste and Citizenship Forum, okay? It existed before this process and it was important. There were the state monitoring agencies. In Brazil, we had them. Now Bolsonaro have, it's slashing down everything, including our state monitoring agencies that monitor what the state is doing regarding social, environmental, and other aspects. And there was a creation of an independent monitoring committee in which we will participate amongst others. Next, please. I'm going towards the end, okay? Next, please. And there were 28 contracts with 22 cooperatives, employing over 1,000 waste speakers. Selective waste collection door-to-door was implemented in 25 of the 31 cities in the federal district. However, citizens still mix waste. And now we working towards having this follow-up epidemiological study with cooperation between the University of Brasília and WIEGO. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. And so some voices from the ground, as a closing. These are in the process that I monitor. I go every 6 months, I go to Brasília and do this assessment. I collect the stories from the waste speakers' perspectives. So some stories, one waste speaker who said that the open dump, there were too many accidents and even deaths. At the sorting sheds, they are rare, though citizens still need to learn how to sort their waste properly. Another one saying that in the beginning, it was really hard for us to leave the open dump. It was like a big shock. But today, I realized that the situation could not go on because it destroyed the environment. But we are workers, thus we wanted our rights. Next, please. So, in terms of concluding, what we are trying to do with this close follow-up in the process of Brasília is to come up with what I'm calling kind of worker-driven guidelines in which we plan to build from the experience and suggest what would be a process to close open dumps in which livelihoods is addressed. We are already producing some stuff, as Jenna already mentioned, and I have a few other stuff that I want to produce in the next months. We know that voluntary commitments to livelihood protection often fail. So we need to put our minds together to think of mechanisms to that enforce governments to address livelihoods. The issue of ineffective or non-existing monitoring really negatively impacts any plan that you have for addressing livelihoods. And the existence of this independent committee put some pressure into the government, to follow up with what had been planned. We are aware there obligations for cities and corporations to ensure livelihoods protection, as I said, should be binding and enforceable. So we need to think of, how can we come up with co-responsibility clauses with finance organizations such as the World Bank, because they are the ones who finance these kind of processes. And then they say they have a livelihood protection plan that they ask the government that they are financing to put in place, but they never follow up if the plan is actually implemented and how. And verification of cities' compliance to livelihoods protection needs to be done in a rigorous and independent way. We're trying, with our limited capacity to do that in Brasilia, but it's incomplete. There are a lot of things I could be doing that I can. Next, please. So this is it. Sorry, it's long, but I wanted to give you an idea of the whole process. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you so much. And we're absolutely good on time. It's such a fascinating case. And what really strikes me about this case is that so often we see these gains made in windows of political opportunity, but this is a process that was sustained over years. And you really get the sense as you go through the presentation, how long this took and all the different components and studies and forums that had to take place. And it seems to me to be a testament of the strength of the movement and also the levels of accountability and participation that were built into the process, the fact that it was able to be sustained. And also perhaps, as a testament of the value of having an independent monitoring committee that could build some accountability into the process. So I want to open it up to questions. We have about 15 minutes, but before I do, I wanted to give the opportunity to Delhi. We have Shalini, Avi, and Malavika, it looks like, on the call. And we heard from Sonia just now about this example from Latin America. I gave a little bit of context of how this issue is playing out in West Africa. And I'm wondering if someone from Delhi could maybe give us a little bit of context on how you're seeing this issue of dump closure play out in Delhi, and also just any questions you have for Sonia, Shalini, Avi, or Malavika. And after that, we'll open it up to the wider group, if that's okay.
First of all, just thank you, Sonia, for an absolutely fascinating presentation. I mean, you must have read, Sonia, you forwarded it to me also, that the dump sites in Delhi are so huge that they are touching the largest and the tallest monuments we have in Delhi. So it is a huge problem for us, both in terms of environment and livelihood. But so while the capacity of 2 of the dump sites have been exhausted years back, it continues to be a site for dumping and for livelihood. Now, so my question to you is regarding the work that we are doing on the master plan, which is basically a plan for 20 years for land use in the city. And is there any way, I mean, we have several learnings that we are picking up from your presentation, but also any engagement on your part with the master plan in any of the cities? And if so, what are the recommendations that we could put in for the master plan, or a good practice that we could cite?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Shall I answer or wait for another question?
Go ahead and answer, Sonia.
Okay. Shalini, yes, I've been following up the news about Ghazipur, and yeah, I was shocked that it is nearly taller than the Taj Mahal. And I think if we can think of a kind of a lesson from the process in Brasilia that may be useful for the process that you are involved in terms of drafting the master plan in Delhi. It's you see, as I explained in the background context, maybe I might have forgotten to say, but we have a national solid waste policy. It was written in one of the slides, but I didn't mention it verbally. And the process that led to approval of this national solid waste law in Brazil, policy, was a very participatory process. We were part of this process together with the National Waste and Citizenship Forum. And under the Waste and Citizenship Forum, we gathered waste speaker organizations, we gathered, sanitation professionals who were aligned to citizenship and protection of livelihoods, and we managed to put into the law that was approved in 2010, but it was a 19-year process for us to get there, that law approved. We managed to state that dumps need to be closed, but with livelihood protection of waste speakers. And this gives us the law, okay, the backing of the law, which we used in this process in Brasilia, because this process in Brasilia, there is a government that it's actually right, it's center right, okay? If we think about politics and how these politics play out when we implement policies. But the thing is, we have the law. So the prosecutor office used the law to say, you need to close the dam, but it need not be, it cannot be at the expense of livelihoods. So if I would advise you is to have this kind of statements in the master plans, but in a way that includes what is a livelihood plan, because otherwise it leaves it too open. In our case, we included what we meant by livelihood, addressing livelihoods in closure of open dams. So we have the law that we can use, and we say we have to address the work conditions. We need to provide them with employment, with exit strategies if they no longer want to work in dumps, with waste. We have, what is actually stated in the position paper that we have available as WIEGO position paper. So I guess, work on the language and be specific, make sure that the language is specific enough in the master plan.
Great. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you.
It looks like we have a question from Mike Bird. Mike, do you want to unmute and go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much, Sonia. The question is whether you think that the network that we have, that that we're part of, can be the vehicle for the putting into practice of what you've learned there in Brasilia, if needs be in similar places, in other places. But in similar circumstances. So I mean, it's fantastic that you're producing the guideline for how to go about it. I guess my question is, how do people know where to get the guideline? Do we feel like we've got the network necessary to be able to spread that information and for it to be taken up and used?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. Yes, the more or less the plan is, as we have these learnings, we are going to produce a toolkit, kind of toolkit, which I'm calling it provisionally as work-based guidelines with different aspects of this process in individual kind of briefs that can be read independently and together. So in terms of the knowledge and materials, resources, we are working towards that. After having that, the idea is to do a kind of a convening with the waste speakers organizations to validate that. And later on, the idea is to open up and have a kind of meeting with some international organizations, including perhaps the World Bank, so that we can highlight the work, reflect about this work, and try to take it to the next level. I think one thing that might be interesting is to have like a process in which we have organizations that can monitor such processes, you know, like independent organizations who throw light on what is happening, how it's happening, and put pressure in the local context where dumps are being closed towards implementation of livelihood measures, you know. But I'm open, and this is idea to engage more with WIEGO, other WIEGO staff, so that we can brainstorm of how to take these kind of learnings, you know, to the next level.
Thanks, Sonia. It looks like we have a question from Caroline Quijato. Caroline, you want to go ahead?
Yes, Sonia, this is really fascinating. Thank you so much. Now I've learned so much about that process. My question is, I know that this work and your experience in Brasilia had a significant impact on the work in Johannesburg. And just following up on some of Mike Bird's questions around how we scale up or expand this work so that it has a larger footprint, could you just give us a sense of that work there and the lessons that you think were important for Johannesburg from the learnings that the Brasilia example provided that context? Because then that can help us also think about how this work is relevant in other spaces. Just a reflection on that, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much for raising the process in Johannesburg. I've been following it up since, if my memory doesn't fail me, since 2016 or 15, when I engaged with the South African Cities Network in an event in Joburg. And this experience was really important for the process in Johannesburg, as it has been raised by Melanie recently, because what happened is this whole framework of accountability of laws that state that waste speakers need to be included, and the whole process of the National Waste and Citizenship Forum really sparked some ideas in the process in Joburg. So I've been going, you know, sometimes once or twice a year and engaging in this process. It started with South African Cities Network, but then it moved on to be the work that the Department of the Environmental Affairs is doing, and they really drew from Brazil's process in general in terms of shaping the guidelines for integration of waste speakers in South Africa. The document it's pretty much ready. It's in final review process, might be out maybe right now. Yeah, I think this is one kind of contribution, you know, participating as a kind of resource. Federico was also invited to contribute in this process towards the last year, if I'm not mistaken. So there is a lot that can be learned from some countries, not only Brazil, and we can do that in a very kind of purposeful way by assisting those that are doing the local work with inputs that can be talks, can be materials like the position paper, you know, doing this exchange and knowledge exchange that kind of can spark ideas and process, and doing the reviewing. I've been working closely with Melanie, who oversees this process. We need to strategize and do things, in very strategic ways, and drawing from the wealth of information that WIEGO has with many other people who have been doing, fantastic work in Colombia, in other places.
Okay, thanks, Sonia. So it's now 10 o'clock Eastern time, and so we need to close. But just wanted to say thank you again so much to Sonia and to everyone for participating. If you haven't already, please read Sonia's position paper on dump closure. And also, before we close, just wanted to put out a shameless plug for the next webinar, which Anna, Carolina, and I will be doing in 2 weeks' time on WIEGO's approach to co-production, which is about an effort that Anna and I we started last year on reflecting internally on how WIEGO does research, and particularly participatory research, and also trying to position WIEGO more within the debates on co-production and action research. So thanks again so much to everyone. Sonia, if you have any final remarks from you?
Yeah, just to say that we are really trying to do things in very cooperative ways, because we small at WIEGO in general here in Brazil particularly, and we're doing this memorandum of understanding with the University of Brasilia to address the health issues of the now cooperative members. And my next step is to involve the School of Architecture so that they can follow up the issue regarding housing. As I mentioned, there was this plan to build houses for the community around the dump that was closed. So we're trying to do things in collaborative ways with different organizations so that we can multiply our presence, and in this line of work. And we should all do that, in the work that we do, collaborating with Joburg and then any other places that need our support. And we're here to, be supportive of any city that is engaged in similar processes. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining, and